Alright, today we are talking all about texture and how we are going to create textures using line. I've got this image posted on our weekly modules page you can download. You do not have to use this. This is just a simple line drawing of a tree, sky, clouds, and a little path. And I'm just using these simple items to kind of help look at how we can create different types of textures using different types of line and how we can apply that line. So the first thing I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this on your drawing, on the back side of it if you like, if you're using paper and pencil, or if you're doing chrome canvas, you can make a little boxes over here. And what I'm just doing is I'm making some boxes. I'm gonna make 4 of them here that I'm going to use to create some different texture so I can kind of take a look at what happens when I use lines in different kinds of ways. So the first way, we'll put a little 1 here next to it, is what we call hatch lines. And hatch lines are lines that go in one direction and they run what we call parallel or right alongside each other. Continuing in the same direction, they're not really supposed to touch. That's what parallel means. They kind of run alongside each other but don't touch. And those create sort of a very consistent, almost sort of smooth, depending on what the shape of the object we were drawing was. That might kind of create sort of a smoother type of texture. The second type of line is what we call crosshatch. And crosshatch start off with those hatch lines, those hatch marks, those lines that go in the same direction. But crosshatch marks have lines that come back in the other direction. And you can already begin to see that when I lay those lines going back over and create the crosshatch, that crosshatch begins to create sort of a rougher texture, just a little bit rougher. We can also look at something called a stipple, and stipple is using lots of little dots to create value and texture. So understand that we are not just creating texture, but when we're using line, anytime we use it and we begin to kind of put lines next to each other or um, build lines really close to one another or overlap them, they begin to create value. And so there's a couple ways that we can look, and I'm going to go back to my pencil here because I really want to turn my size down and take a look. If you're doing a pencil and you do stippling, you can see how those stipples create a much softer sort of texture than those dark lines, those dark stipple dots, stipple marks. I'm making some little dark ones here. I'll turn my opacity up just a little bit. And you can kind of see that sort of in between we can get sort of rougher looking textures where we've got a darker and maybe a little larger stipple or a little dot. And that provides what we call contrast. When we have a dark black dot on a very white background, that creates contrast because those are two very different things next to each other. But where those lines or dots are lighter, it provides less contrast and becomes softer. Now we can start to see how we can use that value to also impact how hard or soft a texture might look. Okay, I'm going to fill this in just a little bit. And so this kind of ranges from this sort of harder texture up here to the softer texture sort of down that direction. Last but not least is I'm going to do what we call little scribble marks. And I'm going to turn the opacity up as large as I can. And little scribble marks just go in all kinds of crazy little directions. So you can see when I use scribble marks, that contrast kind of comes back into play, and I start to get a little areas that are very light and bright from where that white's coming through, but also get lots of little dark areas where the little scribbles overcross each other and create dark areas and light areas. And it's sort of a rough texture, but we can sort of imagine how that texture might be something like a Brillo pad or one of those steel wool pads if you've ever touched one of those, um, or a sponge, one of those. Um, oh, well, the little loofah sponges, they kind of look like that, and they look like that might have that soft, but scrunchy kind of texture. So now I want to think about, and I'll put a little four here. Let's remind us that we got those four different textures. And now I want to start thinking about how I can use those different textures in my drawing. Where would I use different types of line? And how could I make my little areas of this drawing look like they have the texture I want them to have? Well, I'm going to start with the leaves in my tree. And already I think about how I like those scribble marks, but I think if I went with my pen tool, or if I had a pencil and I got it really sharp and really dark, a little darker than I can get with this, that I might use that contrast. I'm going to come up here and make my scribble marks. And as I make my scribble marks, you can start to see all those maybe little leaves start to develop. You can almost start to see the little leaves start to pop in there as I create little leaf textures. And because they're leaves, I can go outside the area of that little drawing I started and create the leaves that kind of come out and go out above and beyond the basic little shape. And I can create the shape any way I want, and so can you. And again, you didn't have to start using this drawing at all. You can draw anything you like, but we want to take a look at the textures and what you're drawing. Maybe you'll draw somebody with hair, and you might think about the texture of hair. How would I draw the texture of hair? Or you might draw a car and think, oh man, how can I make that car look super smooth? All right, I'm going to change the shape of this a little bit. I'm going to make it crazy, and you can add leaves to yours and make yours crazy if you're using this drawing. Well, you make yours different. Make yours look like you would want yours to be. If this was your tree out in your house, front of your house, what would it look like? Where would those leaves go? Okay, and I'm starting to like my leaf pattern here. But now I like to create little shape, and that's where I'm going to make some more value in my drawing here. As I create these scribbles, I'm going to start now thinking about, look, when I go over this bottom area, sort of the bottom part of the tree, the bottom part of the leaves, it almost now looks like those leaves kind of go back in distance because they've got those values of where it's darker underneath. And I'm going to put a little couple here, little extra darker areas here. Like maybe it's trees got little layers of dark areas. And this kind of creates the impression that not only does this tree have leaves, but it's got depth. All right. I like my leaves. Now I'm going to think about my bark. Now, when I think about my bark, I think sort of about those crosshatch marks. Only I think about, what if I made my crosshatch marks just a little crazy? And I'm going to go back with my pencil here because I don't want to have quite as much contrast. And instead of making crosshatch marks that just go straight up and down, what if I squiggle them just a little bit? Well, so now I've got squiggle lines, but when I cross over them, I kind of like that. It looks like bark to me. Little squiggly lines. Now, if you want to, you can bring those crosshatch marks, and I'm just going to use that real light pen tool, real small pen tool, and turn that opacity down just a little bit. And I'm going to do little hatch marks along this side of the tree, just the left side. And then I'm going to do little crosshatch marks. And do you see what's kind of happening? By using the crosshatch, not only am I kind of keeping that sort of rough texture of the bark, but now I'm also creating that value. Remember we talked about how light or dark something is? That's that value. So now the left side of my tree has a little more value than the right side of my tree because I used some of those crosshatch lines to help create that rough texture that I like, but also that that value that I like. Now I'm going to think about the clouds. And so when I think about the clouds, I kind of like the soft texture I got with that pencil. But I want to turn the opacity down because I liked it when it was really light. And I'm going to turn my size up, and I want to see what kind of dots I can get. Oh, now I'm creating all kinds of little soft dots in my cloud. I don't add too many because I want my cloud to sort of stay white. Real light in color anyway. I'd like to have a little texture to it and a little value again. By adding a little bit of value underneath of it, maybe it kind of gives that impression that it's a three-dimensional cloud. But by using those really light dots and really close to each other, and they kind of create nice little soft transitions, it creates a soft texture. That cloud sort of looks soft, if you will. So now I want to think, how am I going to do my background? I'm only using pencil here. I'm not using a bunch of colors, so I'm not going to make it blue. But I do want to think about how I can use my pencil. And if you're using pencil, how you might use that if you've got a couple pencils, use that dullest pencil, the pencil that has the least amount of point to it, if you will, and you want to make the lightest mark, and you want to apply it very lightly, and to kind of create that, I'm going to turn my size up, I should say here. That makes that point duller, and I'm going to turn my opacity down, and because that makes it like I'm putting less pressure. All right. And now I'm just going to do those hatch lines back and forth. We talked about how those kind of create sort of a soft texture. And I'm just doing my background in a real nice soft, using those lines that just go one direction, those cross hatch, those hatch marks. And I'm just doing my background in a real soft hatch mark. So it creates a nice consistent background, and that makes my white cloud kind of pop out a little bit. And again, this is just like if I was using a pencil. I'm using it really soft and creating those little medium tones to create my sky. All right. Now, what are we going to do for the texture of the grass? Well, let's think about, what if we turn that size way down, but our opacity way up, and we use those little tiny short hatch marks and create lots of little blades of grass. Oh goodness, this is going to take forever, but I really love the texture it's developing. So those little hatch marks that go straight up and down, we're now using line to create this really soft grass. Even though those lines might look a little pokey, if you grass is sometimes pokey right there at the edge because it makes those little sharp points. So I'm just adding my little lines straight up and down. And maybe the wind's blowing some places, and so maybe they tilt a little bit, and that's going to be okay too. Now, if I make my lines shorter, the grass is shorter. But if I make my lines longer, well, that grass gets longer. And if you've ever touched the grass, I'm sure you have, you know that long grass gets really, really super kind of soft. All right. All right, let's just add all those little vertical grass lines all through here. So now we've got the texture of the bark, and we've got the texture of the leaves. They're kind of rough and crumbly looking. And we've got the texture of the clouds, which looks really soft and fluffy. And we've sort of developed a texture even for our sky. It seems like it's real consistent and sort of smooth, just like the sky should look like. The sky shouldn't look bumpy. And now we've got this texture of the grass that's kind of growing around this tree. Maybe this is a little park or something. And so now we've got all these different little textures which are helping convince the viewer, the person who's looking at our drawing, hey, that's a tree and that's got bark on it. I can see the texture of the bark, and hey, that's a grassy field because I can almost put my hands in the grass, run my toes through the grass, and feel how soft that grass would be on my feet. And thinking about how you can even use value to create that space, that impression that things kind of go back into space like we did underneath the tree, and how we can create the volume of that, the shape of that tree by adding a little dark value to the left side of it. All right. And the last thing I want to consider is, how am I going to do my little path? Now, I want my little path to be made of what I call cobblestones, or little stones, little round stones. And the way I'm going to create that is back using that stippling again. I'm going to go back. I'm using my pencil still, but I'm going to turn my size up. And instead of using a really light dot like I did for my clouds, I'm going to use a darker dot. And when I overlap these dots, they're going to get darker. It's going to create value, and it'll create areas where it looks like some stones maybe are on top of others. I wonder why that keeps popping up. I wish it would stop. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay, and so I'm beginning to like the texture that's developing there. And I'm going to try to get inside most of those little white spots. So my path is going to be darker than my grass. Again, that's that value, how light or how dark something is. And it's going to have sort of this bumpy texture that looks like it's a bunch of little pebbles, maybe laying next to each other and stacked on top of each other. All right. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I've got the texture of my leaves, got the texture of my bark, the texture of the sky and the texture of those clouds, or that cloud, the texture of my grasses, and the texture of that little cobblestone path. I hope you all had fun drawing yours today. I hope you were able to make some cool textures and learn a little bit about how to use line to create texture. And I look forward to seeing your drawings. Thank you all and have a great day.